StockViews.com, the community for serious investors.
How to read a P&L statement. Being able to read a set of financial statements is probably one of the most important skills you need in order to analyze a company properly. Many inexperienced analysts let themselves down because they don't understand the basics. But the good news is that it's only going to take a few minutes to learn. Let's start by looking at the recent results issued by Apple for the year just ended. Sales for the year were just under $183 billion. That compares to the prior year figure of just under $171 billion. We can then calculate the percentage sales growth as plus 7%. The next line is cost of sales. This is also called cost of goods sold, and it represents the direct cost involved in making the product. So, for example, for Apple, this will include the cost of materials and components used in the iPhone and for the iPad, in addition to the labour involved in manufacturing those products. Indirect costs, like marketing or research, are not included here. By deducting cost of sales from net sales, we get to gross margin. Most analysts will look at gross margin as a percentage of sales rather than an absolute amount. So let's go ahead and divide gross margin by net sales to get the following figures. 38.59% for 2014 versus 37.62% for 2013. This represents the profit made from each unit before deducting indirect expenses. What we see from these figures is that Apple has been successful in expanding its gross margin. We can calculate that expansion as 38.59 minus 37.62, and that comes out at 0.97%, just under 1%. You'll often see this expressed by analysts as 97 basis points, a basis point being 1/100th of a percentage point. Okay, let's keep going down the P&L. Next we find the operating expenses. These represent the indirect costs of doing business. First one here is research and development costs, or R&D. We can see that Apple spent a massive $6 billion on R&D this year. Quite an impressive figure. Again, analysts will tend to look at these costs as a percentage of sales. So, going ahead and working that out, it comes to 3.3% in 2014 versus 2.62% in 2013. So what we see is that Apple has substantially increased the amount that it spends on R&D versus last year. Then we have selling, general and admin costs, otherwise known as SG&A. This will include things like the marketing budget, the cost of the retail stores, together with the cost of sales staff. If we calculate this as a percentage of sales, it comes out at 6.56% for 2014 versus 6.34% in 2013. By deducting the operating expenses from the gross margin, the company can then calculate the operating income. Again, you've guessed it, we want to look at this as a percentage of sales. So again, let's go ahead and calculate that. The operating margin we see has expanded by only 5 basis points. Essentially, it's stood still. Despite a large increase in the gross margin, it seems that all of those extra profits have been reinvested back into things like R&D and marketing. Okay, next comes other income. And adding on other income, that brings us to income before taxes. After that, the provision for income taxes. And here we can work out the effective tax rate. We do that by dividing the income tax expense by the income before taxes. And here we see that the tax rate has remained quite constant at just over 26%. Right at the bottom of the P&L then, we have net income. Comparing this figure to last year, we see that net income has increased year on year by 6.5%. Companies also usually disclose figures for earnings per share, or EPS for short. In this case, we see that the basic EPS for Apple is 6.49 for this year versus 5.72 last year, an increase of 13.5%. So why is EPS rising faster than net income? Well, usually it's because the number of shares is declining. We see that the company also discloses the basic number of shares used in calculating EPS. If we divide the net income by the number of shares here, we get to the EPS. And indeed, we can see that the average number of shares has been declining, probably because of Apple's share buyback program. So, congratulations, you got to the end of the P&L and indeed the end of this lesson. If you want to test out your new analytical skills, then visit stockviews.com and start participating in the valuable stock discussions that are happening right now. Thanks for listening.
Stockviews.com, the community for serious investors.